rocket in the Rainhill trials meant that the future of the locomotive engine was assured. Not even the continued enmity of James Cropper, who persuaded the board of directors to order 2 locomotives from the manufacturers of the novelty, each at double the cost of the incomparable rocket, could damage George Stephenson now.
To win over public opinion completely, frequent excursions were held along those parts of the line already completed. One of the first outings, on the 14th of November, 1829, numbered Thomas Creevey MP among its participants. He, who had cried out his pleasure at the defeat of the original railway bill, had an ambivalent attitude even now.
Today we had a lark of a very high order. Lady Wilton sent over yesterday to say that the locomotive machine was to be upon the railway at such a place at 12 o'clock for the Knowsley party to ride in if they liked. So, of course, we were at our post in 3 carriages, and some horsemen at the hour appointed. I had the satisfaction, for I can't call it pleasure, of taking a trip of 5 miles in it, which we did in just a quarter of an hour, that is, 20 miles an hour. But observe, during those 5 miles, the machine was occasionally made to put itself out, or go it, and then we went at the rate of 23 miles an hour. But the quickest motion is to me frightful. It is really flying. It is impossible to divest yourself of the notion of instant death to all upon the least accident happening. It gave me a headache which has not left me yet. Sefton is convinced that some damnable thing must come of it. The smoke is very inconsiderable indeed, but sparks of fire are abroad in some quantity. One burnt Mr. Rose's cheek, another a hole in Lady Maria's silk pelisse, and a third a hole in someone else's gown. Altogether, I am extremely glad indeed to have seen this miracle and to have travelled in it. Had I thought worse of it than I do, I should have had the curiosity to try it, but having done so, I'm quite satisfied with my first achievement being my last.
There remained only 1 month of 1829, and the following year must see the railway completed. George Stephenson had signed an affidavit, promising as much. It was with renewed energy that he spurred on his gangs of labourers, the navvies, miners, masons and bricklayers, carpenters and blacksmiths, working on his behalf, serving his dream. Of them all, it was the navvies who were most important, the pickmen and lesser-paid shovellers. An engineering student described them as
the finest workmen in Europe, digging out 25 cubic yards of heavy clay each day. But their desire to run to the public houses and get drunk is so great that many of them perform their day's work in a few hours. These dissolute men exert themselves so violently in their work that I have seen many powerful muscular men with the blood oozing out of their eyes and nostrils.
And a verse of the time bewailed the plight of a cottager who found the railway at the bottom of her garden.
An old woman peeping at the line said, I wouldn't care a farthing, but they destroyed my cottage fine and put away my garden, where I so many years did dwell, growing lots of cabbages and potatoes, but worse than all, me daughter Nell went off with the navigators.
So great was the fame of Stephenson's navvy gangs that agents for American railways and canals about to be constructed arrived in Liverpool offering high wages, and so enticed many of George's workers away, causing some delays in progress on the Lancashire line. But if George was ever worried, he knew better than to show it. Excitable he may have been, but nervous never. James Cropper's commissioned locomotives based on the novelty's design were an utter failure, which only served to increase his dislike of George. At his instigation, the board appointed a civil engineer, William Chapman, to report upon the state of the works. Chapman seems to have taken too much upon himself, not being content with merely examining progress along the line. George was furious and told the board as much.
George, an engine man has been discharged from one of the locomotive engines because he did not give a satisfactory answer to some questions put to him by Mr. Chapman. The dismissal of this man, from all I can learn, is certainly injudicious. I brought him here from the north, where he bore a most excellent character. His answers to Mr. Chapman may have been unsatisfactory, but it is doubtful whether he understood the import of the questions, and it is still more doubtful if they were intelligible to any working mechanic. I cannot but feel some reluctance to bring in engine men with their families from the north who alone are capable of managing this class of engine if they are to be interfered with by an individual unacquainted with the nature of the work. It is a direct interference with my duty, and by a person entirely ignorant of engineering, nor can he be acquainted, when he views a piece of work on the line, with what plans I intend adopting, why I am doing it, or what I intend to do afterwards. I cannot believe that they'll permit me to be thwarted in my proceedings by individuals who neither understand the work nor feel the interest which attaches me to this railway. Allow me, therefore, to ask if thou intends Mr. Chapman to continue on the works.
No.
George Stephenson was without doubt a provoking character. But few men coping with such a gigantic undertaking can have been so spied upon by their colleagues, so constantly mistrusted and unsupported. With the exception of Henry Booth and Joseph Sanders, almost the entire board of the company he served were obstructive towards him, and yet he never once lost heart. By New Year's Day, 1830, there was at last a single-track railway line crossing the whole 4.5 miles of Chat Moss, and the Rocket was given the honour of taking a carriage containing the board of directors to a meeting in Manchester.
Congratulations, George. It certainly looks like being the smoothest part of the line.
Aye, Mr. Booth. And the cheapest, too. I worked on my figures all night. I'll need to check them out, but I make it to be £28,000.
28,000? When at the parliamentary inquiry, that civil engineer, what was his name? I have it. Giles. He estimated it would cost us all of £270,000 to span the marsh.
Oh, never pay no heed to Giles, man. Anybody can make a mistake. I estimated some 40,000 myself.
The embankment at Broad Green was now finished. George Cunningham, who owned the flower nurseries there, had ceased to believe the proximity of the railway presented any threat to his business. He had indeed struck up a friendship with George, their mutual interest in gardening being a great bond. By summer, the line was all but completed, only the finishing touches remained to be done. On the 14th of June, another board meeting was held in Manchester, and George, driving a new locomotive named the Arrow, took the directors over the entire distance.
The trip was a very delightful one for me, as we took the directors on a road along with us for the first time. If I had slacked the reins of our horse on that day, they would have run over the ground in less time. Being, as thou knows, a very cautious man, we were much longer than we need have been.
On the return journey, the 31 miles were covered in 1.5 hours, the crossing of Chat Moss being taken at 27 miles an hour. George was frankly pleased with himself. He must have been even more delighted 2 months later when, riding alongside him on the footplate, he had the enchanting 20-year-old actress Fanny Kemble. Currently playing Juliet on tour in Liverpool, Miss Kemble had found she loved the North, being fascinated by what she called this New England of iron roads and intricate earthworks. At first suspicious of the young lady, George soon warmed to her admiration and artless manner. She, for her part, set down her impressions of the day in a letter to her girlfriend.
My father knows several of the gentlemen most deeply interested in the undertaking of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. And Mr. Stephenson, having proposed a trial trip as far as the 15-mile viaduct, they, with infinite kindness, invited him and permitted me to accompany them, allowing me, moreover, the place which I felt to be one of supreme honour, by the side of Stephenson. We were introduced to the little engine which was to drag us along the rails. This snorting little animal, which I felt rather inclined to pat, was then harnessed to our carriage, and Mr. Stephenson, having taken me on the bench of the engine with him, we started at about 10 miles an hour. The steam horse being ill-adapted for going up and down hill, the road was kept at a certain level, and appeared sometimes to sink below the surface of the earth, and sometimes to rise above it. Almost at starting in Liverpool, it was cut through the solid rock. It is most impressive, quite daunting to behold. How high are these walls, Mr. Stephenson?
That's craning their neck at some 70 feet there, Miss Kemble.
Oh, but that is wonderful. Wonderful work, sir. You must be very proud now it is all finished.
I am fair pleased with myself, there's no denying it. In fact, I shall be some 10 feet tall myself on the occasion of the railway's opening.
That is sometime next month, I believe.
On the 15th September, aye. Has that ticket?
No, I hear they are very much in demand.
Very much. Will they be in Liverpool on that date?
Oh, yes. Why, who would want to be elsewhere? We are making history, are we not?
Then I'll see that gets a ticket, all right, Miss Kemble.
Thank you. Machines hold a great fascination for me.
Aye, the father told me that visit to the docks for herself.
What is a stay in Liverpool without seeing her great ships? I love the sea. And I'm a fair traveller, provided I choose a great ship. Show me a small boat, and I'm very promptly very sick. But this new motion you have given the world is truly delightful. At first I owned to a slight feeling of being run away with. But now I am quite easy and secure. It seems very strange to be journeying without any cause of progress but the little fire horse with its flying white breath and its rhythmical, unvarying pace. On wheels instead of feet, moved by bright steel legs called what, Mr. Stephenson?
They're called pistons, Miss Kemble. And I am called George, or Jody, depending on whether the friend be old or new.
And I... or even draw the motion in smooth. Oh, you are clever, Mr... I mean, George.
George stopped the engine at the Sankey Viaduct, where the amazed actress was able to view that colossal engineering feat as it should be viewed, from the valley below. The massive stone piers linking 9 arches that swept across the sky earned her excited approval, as did the subsequent ride back to Liverpool.
We set off at its utmost speed of 35 miles an hour, swifter than a bird flies. You cannot conceive what that sensation of cutting the air was. 4 years have sufficed to bring this great undertaking to an end. The railroad will be opened upon the 15th of next month. The whole cost of the work, including the engines and carriages, will have been £830,000. Now for a word or two about the master of all these marvels. He is a man of 50 years of age. His face is fine, though careworn, and bears an expression of deep thoughtfulness. His mode of explaining his ideas is peculiar and very original, striking and forcible. And although his accent indicates very strongly his North Country birth, his language has not the slightest touch of vulgarity or coarseness. He has certainly turned my head. I'm in love with Mr. Stephenson.
This is a bit unorthodox, George. But in your case, I'll make an exception. Just so long as you realize these tickets are at a premium.
Aye, I do that, Mr. Booth.
Then it's 2 more, I take it? Well, the young lady can hardly attend without a chaperone.
Oh. Aye. I had no thought of that. We'd no chaperone on the Northumbrian.
That was certainly a singular occasion.
Aye.
Now, I have here a page drafted by James Cropper.
Mm-hmm.
George?
Aye?
I'm saying I have here an order drawn up by the board that in future no one is to ride on the tenders apart from the engine man and the directors.
Oh?
Now, don't misunderstand me, George. Consider, the younger men are far more susceptible than yourself to the wiles of the fairer sex.
Mm.
We don't want to encourage any lax behavior, now, do we?
No. I suppose not, Mr. Booth. Are those my extra tickets, then? Right, I'll take them.
Three weeks later saw the opening of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. Despite uncertain weather, a crowd of 50,000 people was gathered at the Edge Hill terminus. Flags fluttered, bands played, and George's heart positively sang.
Well, how does it feel, George?
Grand, Mr. Booth. It feels grand.
If ever an engineer deserved a laurel wreath, you do.
That best of the world with George Cunningham about that. Although I doubt he deals in laurel bushes.
Don't be embarrassed, old fellow. Accept the compliment. I assure you it's a genuine one.
There's more than any, Mr. Booth, sir. Dan knows no one man ever built a railway.
Well, I never thought to hear you say as much, Stephenson.
Oh, I'm not all bad, Mr. Cropper. I just have sharp elbows. At least that's where my coats are always worn through.
You look very smart this morning, George.
Aye, the wife stood me proud today. It's the colour of claret, I'm thinking. Claret or port, would I say. And have a bonny ruffle to my shirt and all.
Speaking of colour, Mr. Cunningham's shirt as well there. the Duke's carriage the feast of flowers.
Hey, man, wait until I sees the bridge at Broad Green, nearest the nurseries. There's a plant new to the north. It's called a dahlia, so Cunningham tells me. Red, no, scarlet. A blazing scarlet. And massed over the archway. Oh, it's a triumphant flourish of a flower. I can promise that puts all yon flags to shame.
Apparently the entire route's lined with spectators awaiting our cavalcade.
Not to mention the grandstand built at Sankey. That holds 1,000 people.
I do hope there are no accidents. Such a crush causes those of us possessed with a conscience in these matters no little anxiety. The common people lack fine judgment. Now, if a child were to wander onto the track... Well, you've no brakes on your engines, have you, Stephenson?
No, Mr. Cropper. I grant that stopping is an art as yet. But it's one of the first things I shall be stood in to improve now that the railway is built and my time's my own again.
Strange to think you have already improved on the rocket, George.
Aye. Does thou know that not half an hour since I came across that artist chappie, James Naismith, drawing the Northumbrian by mistake. I found the man busy with his pencils and somehow I knew he'd taken up for the rocket. I soon put him right. Northumbrian has a refinement to the cylinders, as thou knows, Mr. Booth. They're depressed, something like this, Mr. Cropper. And Bobby's given her an internal firebox. Now, what that...
Not now, Stephenson. Can't you see that Mr. Huskisson is beckoning to you? The poor man looks pale still, following on his illness.
Yes, I've told him there is no need for him to make a speech. He gave us his voice when it was most needed before Parliament.
Today, it's the Duke of Wellington they've all come to hear. It's a great honour that the Prime Minister should be present.
Mr. Huskisson's been a good friend to the railroad, and we have a few minutes left. Off with you, George.
It's my pleasure, sir. I know who my supporters are. Morning, Mr. Huskisson, sir.
Good morning, Stephenson. My dear, this is the builder of the city's lifeline. May I present Mr. George Stephenson? Stephenson, my wife.
I'm honoured, ma'am. And I wonder if I'd care to accept this. It's merely a cotton handkerchief.
Thank you.
Oh, most appropriate, surely, given the circumstances. We can now move the raw material from port to mill in a matter of hours, Stephenson? Railways are your gift to the world.
Indeed, sir, I hope so. Thou notice, Mrs. Huskisson, that the fabric is printed over with scenic views. There's the viaduct at Sankey, and the writing is set out in French and in German as well as in English, so I'm told by Mr. Booth.
Oh, good man, Booth. Possibly a great man. He and yourself, not forgetting your son, Robert. Triple pillars, Stephenson. Triple pillars.
It's kind of that I say so, sir.
We were travelling with you, of course, in the Duke's special train.
Yeah.
Have you spoken with him at all?
No yet, sir. I understand I'm to see him later.
I'll join you in a moment, my dear. A great man, the Prime Minister. We have had our disagreements. You'll know of my resignation, but no matter. I still recognize his greatness. It saddens me that he is no longer hailed as the saviour of our nation, but is considered by many to be a reactionary, a Tory of the old school, against anything smacking of parliamentary reform.
And nor just parliamentary reform either. I hear he's worried that the coming of the railways will mean bands of radicals can be readily moved from one part of the country to another, the better to ferment trouble. That, I believe, was his very phrase, sir.
Unfortunate.
Yeah.
Most unfortunate. But then not everyone shares your vision, Stephenson. Although some of us may live to envy you for it. Bear with we lesser mortals, eh?
Oh, no lesser, Mr. Huskisson. I might, slower, maybe.
Well, the Duke and I are slow in patching up our quarrel. These many months we have been out of kilter, and I, for one, am sorry for it.
I'll get the opportunity, sir. There's refreshments laid on in Manchester and out in a bit more privacy. Everybody's in good spirits. He'll surely no refuse the hand.
I don't know, Stephenson. I don't know. Who can tell?
At 10:40, the firing of a gun announced the start of the grand procession. Nobody could miss the ornate coach so gloriously decorated for the Duke and his party, with its crimson canopy topped by a ducal coronet, the whole supported on gilded pillars. A band in the carriage before the Duke's played triumphant music, and George Stephenson, driving the engine, had sole use of one line of the track, enabling him to stop and start at will, so that his important passengers had sufficient time to marvel at the wonders of the railway. The other 7 trains were to proceed at 600-yard intervals along the other line. Altogether, the 8 trains carried 722 passengers, who included 3 future prime ministers, earls and bishops, civil engineers, directors of the railway, musicians, and Fanny Kemble.
Enormous crowds of densely packed people lined the road, shouting and waving hats and handkerchiefs as we flew by them. What with the sound of these cheering multitudes and the tremendous velocity with which we were borne past them, my spirits rose to the true champagne height, and I never enjoyed anything so much as the first hour of our progress.
That first hour of unadulterated joy was all there was to be. Arriving at Parkside, the arrangement was that the Duke of Wellington's special train should halt to take up water, while the others slowly steamed past on the parallel track, giving the VIPs a fine view of the new machines in action. 2 of the trains did this. Then there was a slight gap, and some passengers, including William Huskisson, alighted from lower down the Duke's train in order to stretch their legs. There being no platforms, the ground was almost at rail level. To Huskisson's delight, the Duke beckoned him forward to his window, which was over 4 feet above the old man. This meant Huskisson was forced to take a step or 2 back onto the adjacent track in order to talk to him.
You're right, Huskisson. It is a magnificent invention, stupendous, just as you always said.
Generous of you to say so, my lord. But I am not always right. You not refuse a sick man your pardon for past mistakes.
Are you unwell, my dear sir?
Clear the track. Train
A trifle infirm, that's all. But I see it as imperative that I see...
The train.
What? What?
Look out! Huskisson, do get your place. For God's sake, get your place. No, you better step in.
William Huskisson, frail and confused, panicked. As the rocket bore down on him, he stepped back, slipped, and fell right in the path of the brakeless engine. His left leg was crushed to pulp.
Where is my wife? I have met my death. Keep her away until my leg is bound up.
We've 2 doctors here. Hold on, man.
Stephenson, I disobeyed your instructions. Your printed instructions, yes? Yes, I left my carriage. It is my fault. No blame attaches to any other. Remember that. No blame.
Oh, Mr. Huskisson has fainted. Mr. Booth, sir. The Duke's coach uncoupled from the Northumbrian. Uncouple all the carriages, bar the first. Throw the musicians out of that one and prepare to receive Mr. Huskisson.
I'll do it at once.
I'll take him to Eccles.
George covered the 15 miles in 25 minutes, but his errand of mercy proved no use. Liverpool's Member of Parliament, 60-year-old William Huskisson, was to live a mere matter of hours, making his will, meticulously dotting the I's of his name.
The country has had the best of me. I trust that it will do justice to my public character. I regret not the few years which might have remained to me, except for those dear ones whom I leave behind me.
He died in the vicarage at Eccles, where George was picked up by the sobered procession of trains en route to Manchester. In his absence, there had been some talk of abandoning the excursion and returning directly to Liverpool, but fears that the patiently waiting crowds ahead might turn ugly if cheated of their sight of the Iron Duke won the day. Only now the celebratory bands were silent, and the downcast passengers could not respond to the cheers of the unknowing multitude.
As we neared Manchester, the sky grew cloudy and dark, and it began to rain. The vast concourse of people who had assembled to witness the triumphant arrival of the travellers was of the lowest order of mechanics and artisans, among whom great distress and a dangerous spirit of discontent with the government prevailed. Groans and hisses greeted the carriage, full of influential personages, in which the Duke of Wellington sat. High above the grim and grimy crowd of scowling faces, a throne had been erected, at which sat a tattered and starved-looking weaver, evidently set there to protest against the triumph of machinery and the gain and glory which the wealthy Liverpool and Manchester men were likely to derive from it. The contrast between our departure from Liverpool and our arrival at Manchester was one of the most striking things I ever witnessed.
A hostile mob waved banners complaining about unemployment and the cost of bread. One enormous banner urged, "Remember Peterloo," the local massacre in which 11 unarmed factory workers had been killed by government troops a scant 10 years before. The Duke of Wellington wisely kept to his carriage.
Don't be too downhearted, George. Despite the accident, your scheme for a fully mechanised railway is a success. Why, the post office is showing an interest in sending His Majesty's mail by train. Don't blame yourself.
I don't, Mr. Booth. I come from good pit stock and we know life. Quarter rind, man. Quarter rind. But I like Mr. Huskisson.
I feared something like this. I may say I dreaded it. They'll blame those infernal moving engines of yours.
Aye, Mr. Cropper, so they will. Well, it's the first time a machine has killed a member of the upper classes. They'll blame my rocket for it, right enough. But Mr. Huskisson knew the truth of it.
He should have kept his seat.
He was eager to clasp the Duke's hand and to know himself restored to favour.
And I feared the common people would cause an accident.
I was mistaken then. But only in the particular. It is a tragedy. A grievous, grievous tragedy.
Aye, yet it's an ill wind that blows nobody any good. I'm thinking as George Cunningham will do well out in the funeral reads.
Well, I, for one, refuse to listen to such talk. No good can come of it. Anyway, somebody must take responsibility for cancelling the engineers' banquet at the Adelphi and the celebratory ball on Thursday. I'll see you both tomorrow. Good evening to you.
Good night, James.
I'm sorry, Mr. Booth. It's just my way of coming to... I never thought when giving Mrs. Huskisson the souvenir handkerchief this morning that it would ever be put to such good use. Poor lady.
What will you do now, George? Now you have changed our ideas of time and space.
Does there need to ask? I shall first design an effective braking mechanism for my locomotive engines.
Of course. And after that?
Why? After that, I shall go out and build my railway lines the world over. America, India, China.
Throughout the entire world, in fact, eh, George?
I can do it, Mr. Booth.
Ah, I don't doubt it, George, my friend. Believe me, I don't doubt it for one moment.